She satisfyingly signed her divorce papers 2 days before Christmas, and her husband's former business partner couldn't stop smiling. The conference room smelled like expensive leather and fresh coffee. Layla sat perfectly still, her hands folded on the mahogany table, watching the attorneys shuffle papers back and forth. Garrett's lawyer, a silver-haired man with a reputation for destroying spouses in court, slid the final document across the table with the confidence of someone who'd already won. And he had, on paper at least. Layla had lost the house, the stocks, the savings account they'd built together over 7 years. She was walking away with a 12-year-old Honda Civic in a studio apartment in a part of Austin she'd never even visited before. Garrett sat across from her, and she could feel his energy even without looking up. He was practically vibrating with barely contained joy. His foot tapped under the table, his fingers drummed on the armrest. He kept glancing at his phone, probably texting Megan updates in real time. She signed her name, Layla Mitchell, soon to be Layla, just Layla again. Her attorney, a tired public defender she'd found through a free legal clinic, gathered the papers without a word. There was nothing to say. They both knew she'd been outgunned from the start. Garrett stood up first. He actually extended his hand to shake hers, like this was a business deal, like they hadn't shared a bed for 7 years, like she hadn't built everything he was about to celebrate losing her over. She didn't take his hand. She walked out of the conference room, through the marble lobby, past the security desk, and into the bitter December air. Her old Civic was parked 3 blocks away. She couldn't afford the building's parking garage. But she didn't walk toward her car. She stopped at the curb, waited. A black Escalade with tinted windows pulled up exactly on time. The passenger window rolled down, revealing a face Garrett would recognize immediately. Reed Calloway, tech legend, early investor in 3 unicorn startups. The man Garrett had pushed out of their original partnership 8 years ago because he didn't want to share credit. Reed smiled at Layla. Not a polite smile, a warm one. She opened the door and climbed in. Behind her, still standing on the courthouse steps, Garrett had stopped moving entirely. His phone was halfway to his ear. His mouth was slightly open. The color was draining from his face as the Escalade pulled away. But Garrett had no idea what he'd just signed away. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10 at the end. Now, let's continue. 7 years earlier, Layla Chen was 26 years old and living in a cramped apartment in East Austin, surviving on freelance coding jobs and ramen noodles. She'd graduated top of her class from UT Austin's computer science program. But the tech industry in 2016 wasn't exactly rolling out red carpets for quiet, introverted women who preferred solving problems to networking at rooftop parties. She met Garrett Mitchell at a coffee shop. Not a cute coffee shop, a grimy one near the university where students came to abuse the free Wi-Fi. She was debugging a payment processing system for a client who'd already bounced 2 checks. He was nursing a cold brew and pitching his revolutionary idea to anyone who'd listen. Most people wouldn't listen. Garrett was sure, but he was also clearly broke, clearly desperate, and clearly operating on more ambition than substance. But Layla listened. His idea wasn't bad, actually. A cloud-based inventory management system for mid-size retailers, the kind of businesses too big for spreadsheets, but too small for enterprise solutions. The market was there, the concept was solid. The problem was that Garrett couldn't code a single line to save his life. He admitted this freely, laughing at himself, running his hair through that way that made him look boyish and vulnerable. He said he'd been looking for a technical co-founder for months. Everyone wanted equity he couldn't offer. Everyone wanted salaries he couldn't pay. Layla should have walked away. She had enough problems without adopting someone else's startup dreams. But there was something about the way he looked at her when she started explaining how she'd structure the back end. His eyes went wide. He leaned forward. He said the words that would change everything. "You're brilliant. You know that, right?" I've talked to dozens of developers, and none of them think like you do. Nobody had ever called her brilliant before. Not like that. Not with that much conviction. 3 months later, they were dating. 6 months after that, they launched the beta version of what would become Ironclad Systems. A year later, they were married in a small ceremony at the Travis County Courthouse. Neither of them could afford a real wedding, but Garrett promised her they'd renew their vows somewhere beautiful once the company took off. That promise would never be kept. What Layla didn't know, what she wouldn't learn until much later, was that Garrett had already burned one business partner before her. Reed Calloway had been his roommate at Texas State, and together they'd sketched out the original concept for Ironclad on napkins and whiteboards. But when Reed wanted to bring in outside investors and build slowly, Garrett wanted to move fast and stay in control. They'd fought. Reed walked away. Garrett kept the idea. He never mentioned Reed to Layla, not once in 7 years. The company grew, slowly at first, then explosively. Layla worked 18-hour days building the infrastructure, while Garrett worked the phones, the meetings, the conferences. He was good at it, genuinely good. He could walk into a room full of skeptical investors and walk out with checks. He could turn a cold sales call into a 6-figure contract. But the product they were selling, every line of code, every algorithm, every security protocol, that was Layla. In the early days, Garrett acknowledged this. He'd introduce her at events as the genius behind the curtain. He'd defer technical questions to her. He'd hold her hand under the table during investor meetings and squeeze it 3 times, their private signal that meant, "I love you." She didn't know it yet, but someone else had been watching Garrett's rise and waiting for his fall. The shift happened gradually, the way all erosions do. First, it was small things. Garrett started doing interviews alone because Layla didn't like the spotlight anyway. He began referring to the company as my vision instead of our company. He stopped introducing her at parties altogether. There was a moment, she'd remember it later as the turning point, at a tech conference in San Francisco, a panel discussion on innovation. Garrett was one of 4 speakers, and Layla sat in the audience, watching her husband charm a room full of industry leaders. Someone asked about the technical architecture behind Ironclad's success. It was a softball question, the kind Garrett usually deflected with a joke and a redirect. But this time, he answered. He talked about proprietary algorithms and machine learning integrations and security protocols that set industry standards. He talked for 7 minutes straight, using terminology he'd clearly memorized from her presentations, throwing around concepts he didn't actually understand. The audience was impressed. They always were. Layla watched a woman in the front row lean forward, taking notes. A man near the back nodded along like he was witnessing genius in real time. Everyone looked at Garrett Mitchell, visionary founder, and saw exactly what he wanted them to see. Nobody looked at the quiet woman in row 15, who'd actually built everything he was describing. By year 5, Layla had become invisible in her own creation. And Garrett? Garrett had become someone she barely recognized. The hungry, humble dreamer from the coffee shop had been replaced by a man who genuinely believed his own mythology. He bought a Porsche, then a second one. He started flying first class to conferences where he was now a keynote speaker. He hired a personal stylist, a media coach, a brand consultant. Layla stayed home. She maintained the code. She fixed the bugs. She answered the 3 a.m. calls from enterprise clients whose systems were crashing. She kept asking about starting a family, about maybe slowing down now that they had money, about building something beyond the company. Garrett kept saying, "Next year." Next year never came. The first time Layla felt truly invisible was at Ironclad's 5th anniversary party. Garrett had rented out the rooftop of the W Hotel in downtown Austin. 300 guests, an open bar that cost more than Layla's first car, a custom ice sculpture shaped like the company logo. She'd spent weeks preparing a presentation about the technical roadmap, new features, security upgrades, the machine learning integration she'd been developing in secret. Garrett had promised her 15 minutes on the agenda. When the night came, he gave her 3. 3 minutes sandwiched between the CFO's budget projections and a DJ set. She rushed through her slides, watching the crowd's eyes glaze over, watching Garrett check his phone in the front row. Afterward, a tech journalist approached her. He'd been researching a profile on Ironclad and wanted to know more about the codebase. Before she could answer, Garrett materialized at her elbow, sliding an arm around her waist. "My wife handles the technical stuff," he said, steering the journalist away. "But if you want to understand the vision, the real story, I'm your guy." Layla stood alone by the bar for the rest of the night. Nobody else approached her. Most of the guests didn't even know who she was. A young intern, fresh out of college, eager to impress, asked her at one point if she knew where the bathroom was. He assumed she was a caterer. She pointed him in the right direction and didn't correct him. That was the night she started sleeping in the guest room. Not because of a fight. They didn't even fight about it. She just stopped going to their bedroom, and Garrett didn't ask why. He didn't even notice for 2 weeks. What Garrett didn't realize was that Layla had stopped crying weeks ago. The interview that broke something inside her aired on a Tuesday morning. Garrett had been invited onto a national business news program, the kind of appearance that meant he'd officially made it in the tech world. Layla watched from their living room, still in her pajamas, clutching a coffee mug that had gone cold an hour ago. The host was charming, deferential. She'd clearly done her research on Ironclad's growth trajectory, their client retention rates, their industry awards. What she hadn't researched, what nobody ever seemed to research, was who actually built the technology. The host asked about the technical architecture behind Ironclad's success, the proprietary algorithm that had made them industry leaders, the one that Layla had spent 3 years perfecting. Garrett laughed, that easy, charming laugh that used to make her heart flutter. "The technical stuff," he said, waving his hand dismissively, "that's handled. I focus on vision. I focus on where we're going, not how we get there. That's what separates founders from coders." Founders from coders. Layla set down the mug. Her hands weren't shaking. That surprised her. She thought they should be. She went to her home office, opened her laptop, and started a new folder. She labeled it simply, Exit. She didn't know exactly what she was planning yet, but she knew with absolute certainty that she was done building someone else's empire. Megan Torres arrived at Ironclad Systems on a bright Monday morning in March. She was 24, freshly graduated from Stanford, and hungry in that specific way that made older engineers nervous. Her resume was impressive: internships at Google and Amazon, a senior thesis on distributed computing that had won some departmental award. On paper, she was exactly the kind of talent Ironclad needed to keep growing. In reality, she was something else entirely. Layla noticed her on the first day, not because of anything Megan did. She was perfectly professional, perfectly polite, but because of how Garrett reacted to her. He straightened up when she walked into rooms. He made excuses to visit the engineering floor, where he normally never went. He laughed at things she said that weren't particularly funny. She laughed at all of Garrett's jokes. She stayed late whenever he stayed late. She wore just enough perfume that you'd notice it when she leaned over your shoulder to look at your screen. Layla noticed. Of course she noticed. She'd been married to Garrett for 6 years. She knew his tells, the way his voice changed when he was trying to impress someone, the way he ran his hand through his hair when he was nervous, the way his attention sharpened when he was interested in something. Or someone. But when Layla mentioned it to Garrett, casually, carefully, testing the waters, he rolled his eyes so hard she thought they might get stuck. "Megan? She's a kid. A talented kid, sure, but come on, you're being paranoid." He said paranoid like it was a diagnosis, like she was sick, like her instincts, the same instincts that had built his entire company, couldn't be trusted. She let it go. She shouldn't have. Over the next few months, Layla watched Megan's career trajectory accelerate at a pace that defied logic. Promotions came faster than they should have. Access permissions expanded beyond what her role required. She was suddenly being invited to executive meetings, to client dinners, to the private strategy sessions that Layla herself had stopped being included in. The message was clear, even if nobody said it out loud. Layla was being groomed. For what, exactly? Layla didn't want to admit. 3 months later, Layla found the jewelry box. It was stuffed in the pocket of Garrett's blazer, the charcoal Tom Ford he'd bought for the Inc. magazine photo shoot. She'd been taking his dry cleaning to the car when she felt the weight of it. A small velvet box, navy blue, the kind that holds earrings, or a bracelet, or a necklace. Not a ring, though, thank God, not a ring. She opened it. Diamond studs, small but real, maybe $2,000, maybe more. Their anniversary wasn't for 4 months. Her birthday had passed in February. He'd gotten her a gift card to a spa she'd never been to. Christmas was 10 months away. She put the box back in his pocket. She drove to the dry cleaner. She sat in the parking lot for 40 minutes, staring at nothing. That night, she asked him about it. She kept her voice light, curious, non-threatening. He didn't even hesitate. "There for a client," he said, not looking up from his phone. "A thank you gift. You know how it is." She did know how it was. She knew that Ironclad didn't give thank you gifts. She knew that expense reports crossed her desk and there was no jewelry purchase on any of them. She knew that her husband was lying to her face with the casual ease of someone who'd done it many times before. "It's for a client. You're being paranoid." Megan thought she was learning the system. She was learning a trap. The divorce announcement came on a Thursday evening. Layla had made dinner, salmon with asparagus, Garrett's favorite, a peace offering after weeks of cold silence between them. She'd lit candles, she'd opened a bottle of the expensive wine they'd been saving for their anniversary. It felt desperate, even as she was doing it, like rearranging deck chairs on a sinking ship. But she'd convinced herself that maybe, if they could just sit down and talk, really talk, they could find their way back to something real. He walked in, saw the table, and sighed. Not the reaction she'd been hoping for. "We need to talk," he said. 4 words. 4 words, and she knew. She knew before he said anything else. She knew from the way he wouldn't meet her eyes, from the way his hand kept drifting toward his phone. "I want a divorce." Just like that. No build-up, no explanation, no "I still care about you" or "this isn't easy for me." Just a statement of fact, delivered with the same tone he used to reject vendor proposals. Layla sat very still. The salmon was getting cold. The candles flickered between them like they were trying to bridge a gap that had grown too wide to cross. Why? She heard herself ask. After everything. He had the decency to look uncomfortable. At least there was that. "I've evolved," he said. "The company's evolved. And you," he trailed off, gesturing vaguely in her direction, "you haven't." She tried to argue. 7 years. 7 years of building this together. She'd given up job offers, opportunities, her entire career trajectory, all to support his vision. She'd worked 18-hour days. She'd sacrificed sleep and friendships and her own ambitions. She'd poured everything she had into a foundation that he built his castle on. He cut her off. "You built code," he said. "I built an empire. There's a difference." The candles burned down while they talked. The salmon went cold. The wine sat untouched. Layla listened to her husband explain in calm and patient terms why she was no longer sufficient for the life he wanted to live. She wasn't exciting enough, wasn't social enough, didn't fit the image of the woman who should be standing next to Garrett Mitchell, tech visionary, at industry galas and magazine photo shoots. She wasn't enough. He even had the audacity to frame it as a favor. "You'll be happier," he said. "We both will. You can find someone who appreciates this." He gestured at the carefully set table, the homemade dinner, the effort she'd poured into one last attempt at connection. Someone who wants the quiet life. By the time he left, He had a dinner meeting he couldn't miss. Layla was sitting alone at a beautifully set table, surrounded by the remnants of a marriage she hadn't realized was already dead. She sat there for a long time. The candles burned themselves out. The darkness crept in from the corners of the room. She didn't cry. She was done crying. She opened her laptop and pulled up the folder labeled Exit. Time to start filling it. The code would work perfectly until the day it wouldn't. What Layla discovered over the next 3 weeks made her grateful she hadn't cried. She'd started monitoring the system logs more carefully, a habit born from paranoia that turned out to be pure instinct. Something had felt off for months. Access patterns that didn't match normal usage, downloads that happened at odd hours, queries against the architecture documentation that seemed too systematic to be casual learning. Someone was accessing the core codebase with surgical precision. Someone was downloading architecture documents that even most senior engineers didn't need. Someone was mapping the system from the inside, layer by layer, like they were preparing to replicate it. The access credentials belonged to Megan Torres. Layla spent 3 nights tracing the access logs. She'd barely slept. She'd barely ate. She followed the digital breadcrumbs with the same obsessive attention she'd once devoted to building the system in the first place. What she found was worse than she'd expected. Megan wasn't just studying the codebase, she was being guided. Her access requests followed a pattern too sophisticated for a junior engineer. Someone was telling her exactly what to look for, exactly where to find it. Someone who understood the system's architecture but didn't have the technical skills to extract the information themselves. Someone like Garrett. Layla could have reported it, could have gone to HR, to the board, to a lawyer, but she understood now what she was dealing with. This wasn't just a husband leaving his wife for a younger woman. This was a coordinated exit strategy, one that would leave Layla with nothing while Garrett walked away with everything she'd built. He wasn't just leaving her, he was trying to replace her with a younger model who'd be grateful for the opportunity, who wouldn't ask for credit, who wouldn't want children or stability or any of the things that made Layla boring. And he was trying to steal her work in the process. The beautiful thing about being underestimated was that nobody watched you carefully. Layla spent 3 weeks building what she privately called the Ghost Protocol. She didn't remove her code, that would have been noticed. She didn't sabotage anything, that would have been illegal. Instead, she created a dependency, a subtle one, the kind that wouldn't show up in any audit. Every critical function in Ironclad's system now relied on encryption keys that existed in exactly one place, her memory. It was elegant, really, the kind of solution she would have been proud of under different circumstances. The authentication layers nested inside each other like Russian dolls. The outer layers worked fine. Any competent engineer could maintain them. But the deeper you went, the more the system depended on keys that had never been written down, never been documented, never existed anywhere except inside Layla's head. She'd built in a timer. Nothing dramatic, just a gradual degradation. The system would start throwing errors about 60 days after she left. Minor ones at first, the kind IT departments dismiss as glitches. Then the errors would multiply, then cascade, then collapse. The software would run perfectly, updates would install, features would launch, everything would look normal, until she was gone. Then the system would start encountering authentication errors, minor ones at first, then major ones, then catastrophic ones. And when Megan or any other engineer tried to fix them, they'd find themselves locked out of the very architecture they thought they understood. The documentation would be useless, the code comments would lead nowhere, the recovery protocols would fail because they'd all been built on a foundation that only Layla could access. It wasn't revenge, not exactly. It was just insurance. If Garrett was going to take everything from her, she'd make sure he was left holding an empty bag. The divorce proceedings were brutal. Garrett had hired Whittemore and Associates, a firm known for representing tech executives in high-asset divorces. Their lead attorney, a man named Douglas Crane, had a reputation for finding hidden assets, exploiting prenuptial technicalities, and leaving opposing spouses with nothing but debt and regret. His nickname in Austin legal circles was the Executioner. He earned it. Layla couldn't afford anything close to that. Her name wasn't on most of Ironclad's paperwork. Garrett had always handled the business side. And Texas was a community property state, but community property didn't mean much when your spouse had spent years burying assets in holding companies and stock options you never knew existed. The first mediation session was a massacre. Douglas Crane walked Layla through the company's corporate structure with the patient condescension of a teacher explaining arithmetic to a slow child. He showed her the documents she'd never seen, proving that her contributions had been compensated as work for hire. Her salary, he explained, was her payment. The equity she'd thought she'd been promised? There was no paper trail, no signed agreements, nothing but her word against Garrett's. And in a room full of lawyers billing by the hour, her word was worthless. She got the Civic. She got the studio apartment, technically a buyout of her share of their Austin home, but the amount was insulting. She got a small cash settlement that would cover maybe 6 months of living expenses if she was careful. She didn't get the stocks. She didn't get the profit sharing. She didn't get any stake in the company she'd built from nothing. Garrett's attorneys had argued successfully that her contributions were work for hire, that as an employee of Ironclad, even an early one, she'd already been compensated through her salary. The fact that she'd worked for below-market wages for years, that she'd deferred compensation in favor of equity that Garrett now claimed she'd never been promised, none of that mattered. What mattered was the paperwork, and the paperwork told the story where Layla was just another employee who'd gotten above her station. On paper, she was walking away with almost nothing. Her attorney, an overwhelmed public defender named Janet, who'd taken the case as a favor, actually apologized after the final session. "I did what I could. I'm sorry it wasn't more." Layla told her it was fine. She meant it. Garrett didn't even try to hide his satisfaction. During their final mediation session, he actually smiled at her, that same charming smile from the coffee shop, now weaponized. "No hard feelings," he said. "You'll land on your feet. You always do." He reached out to shake her hand. A business deal concluded. A partnership dissolved. 7 years reduced to signatures on paper and a patronizing handshake. She didn't respond. She just signed where her attorney pointed and kept her face completely neutral. When they left the building together, some cruel administrative requirement that they exit at the same time, she could feel Garrett watching her. She could feel him waiting for the breakdown, the tears, the accusations, the desperate plea for him to reconsider. She gave him nothing. He was practically bouncing as they walked toward the exit. She could see him already composing the text to Megan, could imagine the celebration they'd have tonight, champagne and self-congratulation, and plans for a future that wouldn't include the boring, simple woman who'd made all of it possible. She walked past her old Civic without a glance. She walked to the curb. She waited. The Escalade pulled up exactly when she'd planned. Garrett stopped mid-stride. His phone was halfway to his ear. The smile froze on his face as he watched his ex-wife, his mousy, quiet, unambitious ex-wife, step into the back seat of a $200,000 vehicle. Through the tinted windows, she could see his confusion turn to recognition, then recognition turned to something that looked almost like fear. Garrett saw a broken woman walking out of that building. He should have looked closer. What Garrett never knew, what he wouldn't piece together until it was far too late, was that Layla had started planning her exit long before he'd started planning his. The folder on her laptop, the one labeled Exit, it had grown over those final months into something much more than a collection of documents. It had become a blueprint. She'd started with the money. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would show up in the divorce discovery. Just small transfers, over time, to an account in her maiden name, Layla Chen. A name she hadn't used in 7 years, a name that didn't appear on any Ironclad paperwork. The transfers were careful, methodical. Freelance income from consulting work she'd been doing on the side, weekend projects for old colleagues, algorithm optimization for startups that couldn't afford full-time engineers. Legitimate earnings that Garrett never knew about, because Garrett never paid attention to anything that didn't directly benefit him. He didn't ask where she went on Saturday mornings. He didn't notice the coffee shops where she met clients. He didn't care enough to wonder what his quiet, boring wife did with her time when she wasn't maintaining his empire. His indifference was her greatest asset. By the time he asked for the divorce, she had enough for a year of runway, enough to rent office space, enough to file patents, enough to build something new. The second part was harder, the technology. She couldn't take Ironclad's code. It wasn't hers to take, legally speaking, even though she'd written every line. But she could take her knowledge. Her algorithms lived in her head. Her innovations were patterns she could recreate, and she'd learned a lot in 7 years about what worked and what didn't. More importantly, she'd learned what she'd do differently. Ironclad's architecture was built fast, built scrappy, built to survive the chaos of a startup trying to stay alive. There were shortcuts she'd taken, compromises she'd made, technical debt she'd accumulated and never had time to pay off. If she were building from scratch, she'd do it better, cleaner, more elegant. She called it Aegis, a shield, a protector. Everything Ironclad should have been, but wasn't. More secure, more scalable, better designed from the ground up. She built the prototype in 3 months, working nights and weekends in her depressing studio apartment, fueled by instant coffee and something that might have been rage, but felt more like clarity. The worst nights were the best for coding. When sleep wouldn't come and the walls felt too close and she couldn't stop replaying Garrett's voice in her head, "You built code. I built an empire." She channeled it all into the keyboard. Every line she wrote was proof he was wrong. Every feature she designed was a step toward freedom. By November, she had a working demo. By December, she had something she'd never had before: leverage. The third part, the crucial part, was finding the right partner. Reed Calloway's office was in San Francisco, but he kept an apartment in Austin for sentimental reasons. He'd grown up in Round Rock. His parents still lived there. And despite his success, 3 unicorn investments, a reputation as a kingmaker in the tech world, he'd never quite shaken the dust of Central Texas from his boots. They'd never met formally, but she knew his story. Everyone in Texas Tech knew his story. The young founder who'd been pushed out of his own company by an ambitious partner who wanted all the credit. Sound familiar? She reached out through a mutual acquaintance, a VC who'd invested in both Ironclad and one of Reed's later ventures. The introduction email was simple and direct. "I know who actually built Ironclad. I know what Garrett did to you. I have something better. Let me show you." Reed responded in 4 hours. They met at a restaurant neither of them would normally visit, a diner outside San Marcos where no one from the tech scene would see them together. The kind of place with laminated menus and coffee that came in bottomless cups. The kind of place where 2 people could talk for 3 hours without anyone caring. Layla brought her laptop. Reed brought questions. He was nothing like she had expected. The tech press portrayed him as a shark, ruthless, calculating, always 3 moves ahead. But the man sitting across from her in that vinyl booth was quiet, thoughtful. He listened more than he talked. She walked him through the Aegis demo. She explained the architecture, the security protocols, the scalability advantages over Ironclad's increasingly outdated infrastructure. She showed him the market analysis she'd done, the client pipeline she'd already started building, the revenue projections based on conservative estimates. By the second hour, he'd stopped asking questions. By the third hour, he was sketching investor strategies on a napkin, his handwriting cramped and urgent, ideas flowing faster than he could capture them. "Garrett always was better at taking credit than earning it," Reed said finally. It wasn't bitter, it was just fact. And you were always the one I felt sorry for." Layla bristled. She didn't want his pity. She wanted his expertise, his connections, his ability to turn a prototype into a product. He must have read her expression because he held up his hands in surrender. "That came out wrong," he said. "What I mean is, I saw what was happening. I saw the interviews where he talked about his technology. I saw the way he paraded around at conferences while you stayed home fixing bugs. I knew it was wrong, and I didn't say anything because," he shrugged, "because it wasn't my fight." "It's everyone's fight," she said quietly. "When someone takes credit for work they didn't do, it hurts everyone who does the actual work." He nodded slowly. "You're right, so let's do something about it." They signed partnership papers in November. They lined up seed investors in December. They set a launch date for the first week of January, just after the holidays, when the tech press would be hungry for a new story. And 2 days before Christmas, Layla walked into her divorce proceedings knowing that everything Garrett thought he was winning was already worthless. The divorce wasn't an ending, it was a detonator. The Escalades smelled like leather and success. Layla settled into the passenger seat, and Reed pulled away from the courthouse without a word. He didn't ask how she was feeling. He didn't offer false comfort. He just drove, letting the Austin skyline slide past the tinted windows, giving her space to breathe. The December air was crisp outside, but the car was warm. Christmas decorations blinked from storefronts they passed, red and green lights, inflatable Santas, window displays full of fake snow and manufactured cheer. 2 days till Christmas, 2 days until everything changed. After 3 blocks, she exhaled. "He tried to shake my hand," she said. Reed actually laughed. "That's very Garrett, always performing, even when nobody's watching." Her phone buzzed, then again, then 3 more times in rapid succession. She glanced at the screen. 5 texts from Garrett. "Was that Reed Calloway? Why were you in his car? Layla, answer me. What is going on? Call me." The texts kept coming, question marks, exclamation points, the digital equivalent of panic. She silenced her phone and dropped it in her purse. "Shouldn't you answer that?" Reed asked. She smiled, the first real smile she'd felt in months. "No, I don't think I should." They drove in comfortable silence for a few more minutes, past the Capitol building with its pink granite dome, past the University of Texas campus, where Layla had once dreamed of being a professor. "What are you thinking?" Reed asked. She watched the city slide by. "I'm thinking that I spent 7 years waiting for him to see me, and now I'm glad he never did." The day after Christmas, Garrett threw a party at Ironclad headquarters. Not officially a celebration of his divorce, that would have been tasteless even for him, but the timing wasn't lost on anyone. The company had just closed its biggest quarter ever. They had landed 3 new enterprise clients. The board was talking about an IPO timeline. Garrett had every reason to celebrate. He'd freed himself from a wife who was holding him back. He had a new relationship with someone who actually understood his ambition. And the company he'd built, his company, his vision, his empire, was worth more than ever. He stood in the center of the open-plan office, champagne glass raised, Megan positioned strategically at his side. She was wearing a dress that cost more than Layla's monthly rent. Diamond earrings glinted at her ears. The same earrings Layla had found in Garrett's coat pocket 6 months earlier. The picture of success. The picture of a man who'd finally gotten everything he wanted. "To Ironclad," he said, his voice carrying across the office, "to an incredible year and to even bigger things ahead." The staff cheered. The champagne flowed. Someone had connected a Spotify playlist to the office speakers, and pop music filled the space with manufactured energy. For about 45 minutes, everything was perfect. Then the first alert came in. A minor error message, something about authentication timing out on the East Coast server cluster. The on-call engineer, a kid named Tyler, who'd only been with the company for 6 months, waved it off. These things happen. Server hiccups, network glitches, nothing to worry about. He submitted a ticket and went back to the party. 20 minutes later, the second alert came. Same error, but now it was affecting the West Coast servers too. Tyler frowned at his phone. He showed it to another engineer, who shrugged. Probably a cascading issue, she said. It'll clear up. It didn't clear up. An hour later, the client calls started. First 1, then 5, then 20. The office manager's phone was ringing constantly. The support inbox was filling up faster than anyone could read it. Enterprise clients, the kind that paid 6 figures annually for guaranteed uptime, were experiencing outages, real outages, the kind that cost them money. By 9 p.m., Ironclad's system was experiencing what engineers carefully described as intermittent service interruptions. By midnight, the word catastrophic was being thrown around in Slack channels. Garrett had sobered up rapidly. The champagne was gone, replaced with coffee that nobody was drinking. He stood in the server room, not that he understood what any of the blinking lights meant, watching his engineering team run diagnostics that kept returning the same result. Authentication errors, deep ones, ones that seemed baked into the core architecture. Fix it, he kept saying. His voice had gone from commanding to desperate over the last few hours. Just fix it. We're trying, the lead engineer told him. His name was Marcus, and he'd been with the company almost as long as Layla had. But there's something wrong with the encryption keys. They're not matching anything in our documentation. It's like there are layers we didn't even know existed. Garrett pulled out his phone. He'd called Layla 16 times since the courthouse. 16 times straight to voicemail. He tried again. Voicemail. And again. Voicemail. "Where is she?" Megan asked. She'd been hovering nearby, increasingly pale, increasingly quiet. Her confidence had evaporated somewhere around the 15th client call. "She understands the system better than anyone. She can fix this, right?" Garrett didn't answer. He just kept calling. The phone rang, and somewhere across the city, in a warm apartment with a view of the hills, Layla watched his name flash on her screen and let it go to voicemail. Again, and again, and again. By 2 a.m., the first major client had issued a termination notice, a Fortune 500 company that had been with Ironclad since the early days. Their legal team was already drafting a lawsuit for breach of contract. By dawn, 2 more had followed. The tech press had picked up the story. Ironclad Systems suffers major outage, and Garrett's phone was blowing up with journalists wanting comment. He didn't have any comment. He didn't understand what was happening. The system had been working perfectly yesterday. Nothing had changed. Nothing except... His phone buzzed. Not a call this time. A news alert from a tech blog he followed. Tech veteran Reed Calloway announces new venture with former Ironclad engineer. He clicked the article. He read it twice. He had to sit down. There was a photo at the top. Layla and Reed at some kind of press event, smiling in front of a banner that read, "Aegis Security Reimagined." The article called her the brilliant engineer behind Ironclad's early success. It called Aegis a direct competitor poised to disrupt the market. It mentioned that several of Ironclad's largest clients had already expressed interest in the new platform. The timestamp on the article was 6 a.m. The press event had happened last night. While Garrett was watching his company burn, Layla was standing in a spotlight she'd finally earned. Garrett's hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold his phone. She'd planned this. All of it. The quiet acceptance of the divorce terms, the dignified exit, the worthless settlement she'd agreed to without a fight. She'd known. She'd known the company was already dead. And he'd handed her the detonator. The launch party for Aegis was everything Ironclad's anniversary party hadn't been. Intimate, intentional, full of people who actually mattered. Investors, enterprise clients, journalists from publications that Garrett had spent years trying to impress. The venue was a converted warehouse in East Austin, all exposed brick and Edison bulbs, and the kind of understated elegance that screamed confidence rather than compensation. No ice sculptures, no DJ, just good wine, smart people, and a product that spoke for itself. Layla wore a simple navy dress, no jewelry, no obvious designer labels. She didn't need them. For the first time in 7 years, people weren't looking through her, they were looking at her. Reed stayed nearby, but never in front of her. When journalists approached, he stepped back. When investors asked questions, he deferred. He understood something Garrett never had. The best partners make each other shine. They don't compete for the spotlight. A reporter from TechCrunch cornered Layla near the bar. Can you comment on the rumors that Aegis is directly responsible for Ironclad's system failures? Layla's face revealed nothing. I can't speak to Ironclad's technical issues, she said calmly, but I can tell you that Aegis was built from the ground up with security as a core principle. We don't have single points of failure. We don't rely on any one person's knowledge to keep the system running. The reporter scribbled notes. And your relationship with Garrett Mitchell? There's speculation that my relationship with my ex-husband is exactly that. She smiled, and it was almost warm. Past tense. The reporter pushed harder. Revenge? A scorned wife taking down her ex-husband's company? Layla considered the question. Then she said something that would be quoted in every article written about her for the next year. Revenge requires ongoing anger. I'm not angry at Garrett. I'm grateful to him. He taught me exactly what kind of partner not to be. The reporter blinked. Grateful? Layla nodded. He also gave me the best Christmas gift I've ever received. Freedom. Across the city, Garrett was being fanned by 2 employees, while a third held a trash can nearby in case he needed to throw up.
The board meeting had been difficult. Words like negligence and oversight failure and immediate leadership review had been used. The chairman, a man who'd always treated Garrett like a protege, had looked at him with something worse than anger, disappointment. You told us the technical infrastructure was solid, the chairman had said. You assured us there were no single points of failure. There weren't, Garrett insisted. His voice was hoarse. He'd been talking for hours, explaining, defending, making excuses that sounded hollow even to his own ears. Layla was. She was supposed to do what, exactly? The chairman's voice was ice. Stay forever? Build your company and never leave? You pushed out your co-founder, your wife, and apparently everyone else who actually understood how the system worked. What exactly did you think was going to happen? Garrett had no answer. The board had given him 72 hours to present a remediation plan. Everyone in the room knew there was no remediation plan. The system was hemorrhaging clients by the hour. The stock options that had made Garrett wealthy on paper were cratering in value. The IPO that had seemed inevitable was now a punchline. He tried calling Layla 47 times now. He'd texted, he'd emailed, he'd even tried reaching out through LinkedIn, which felt pathetic even as he was doing it. Nothing. Silence. She'd blocked him everywhere. Megan had quietly cleaned out her desk that morning. No resignation letter, no goodbye, no tearful explanation or apology. Just an empty chair where she used to sit, spinning elaborate lies about how much she was learning. She'd left the diamond earrings on Garrett's desk. A final message. I don't need your gifts anymore. Somewhere across the city, Garrett was watching the news, and for the first time in years, he understood what it felt like to be invisible. Ironclad Systems filed for bankruptcy protection in March. The official cause was catastrophic infrastructure failure, leading to loss of client confidence. But everyone in Austin Tech knew the real story. The man who'd built an empire on someone else's genius had finally run out of borrowed time.
The bankruptcy proceedings were almost as brutal as the divorce had been. Except this time, Garrett was the one losing everything. Creditors lined up. Former clients sued for damages. The building that had housed Ironclad's headquarters, with its open floor plan and ping-pong tables and craft beer on tap, was sold to a real estate developer who would turn it into luxury condos. The employees scattered like leaves in a storm. Some found jobs at other tech companies. Some went back to school. A few, the ones who'd seen how Garrett treated Layla, who'd watched from the sidelines as he took credit for work he didn't do, reached out to Aegis looking for positions. Reed hired 3 of them. Garrett's lawyers tried to sue Layla. They argued that she'd deliberately sabotaged the system, that she'd stolen trade secrets, that her new company was built on Ironclad's intellectual property. It was a desperate move, and everyone knew it. But Garrett was drowning, and desperate men grab at anything that might keep them afloat. Every claim fell apart under scrutiny. The encryption keys weren't in any documentation because they'd never been in any documentation. They existed only in Layla's head, and there was no law against remembering things. You couldn't sue someone for being the only person who understood a system they'd built. The Aegis codebase was clean, built from scratch, with architecture that resembled Ironclad's only in the way that all good systems resemble each other. Independent auditors confirmed it. Expert witnesses testified to it. And the sabotage claim? Layla hadn't removed anything. She hadn't changed anything. She'd simply left. And it turned out that the brilliant founder of Ironclad Systems had no idea how his own product actually worked. The irony wasn't lost on the judge, or the press, or anyone watching. The lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice. Garrett's attorney sent him a bill he couldn't pay. They dropped him as a client 2 weeks later. Megan Torres resurfaced a few months later at a mid-sized firm in Dallas. Entry-level position, unremarkable salary, the kind of job she would have scoffed at a year ago when she was being groomed to replace the founder's wife.
Her Instagram went private. Her LinkedIn profile was scrubbed clean. Her time at Ironclad reduced to a single vague line about enterprise software. She was trying very hard to disappear into anonymity, to become nobody. She never spoke to Garrett again. When his number appeared on her phone, and it did, for weeks after the collapse, she let it ring through to voicemail. She'd listened to one of those voicemails. Once. Just once. "Megan, please, I need you. We can figure this out together. We can—" She deleted it before he finished. She didn't need to hear the rest. Some bridges don't just burn, they evaporate. Garrett's Porsche was repossessed in April, the second one in May. The house went in June, sold at auction for less than he'd paid for it, every penny going to creditors who'd lined up around the block. By July, he was renting a one-bedroom apartment in Round Rock, spending his days sending out resumes that nobody answered, and his nights staring at a wall where his awards used to hang. He'd kept a few things from the old life: a framed magazine cover, a crystal award from an industry conference, a photo of himself shaking hands with some senator at a fundraiser, artifacts of a person who no longer existed. The job search was brutal. He applied to tech companies first. Surely someone would want the founder of Ironclad Systems, even a disgraced one. But the interviews never went well. Hiring managers would ask about what went wrong, about what he'd learned, and he'd fumble through explanations that sounded hollow even to his own ears. Eventually, he stopped applying to tech jobs altogether. He got a position managing a retail store in a strip mall outside Austin. It paid enough to cover rent. Barely. He saw Layla one more time. She was on the cover of a business magazine, one of the glossy national ones that Garrett used to dream about appearing in. She was photographed in Aegis's new Austin headquarters, standing in front of a window with the skyline behind her. The headline read, "The Architect." Not the engineer, not the technical co-founder, the architect. Reed was mentioned in the article, of course. Their partnership was described as symbiotic and unprecedented in an industry known for ego-driven leadership. But the focus was on Layla, her journey, her brilliance, her vision.
Garrett read the article 3 times. Each time hurt more than the last. She'd never been boring. She'd never been not enough. She'd been building something extraordinary right under his nose, and he'd been too busy looking at himself in the mirror to notice. The woman he'd dismissed as just a coder had become the architect of something he could never have built. The quiet wife he'd traded in for a younger model was now worth more than he'd ever been. And the worst part? He couldn't even hate her for it. She hadn't cheated. She hadn't lied. She hadn't sabotaged anything. Not really. She just left. And his entire empire had crumbled because he'd never bothered to understand how it actually worked. He'd done this to himself. Summer turned to fall. Aegis closed a Series B round that valued the company at over $1 billion. Layla and Reed's professional relationship had evolved, carefully, slowly,
the way real things tend to grow. Nobody who knew them was surprised. They'd been building something together, and at some point, the something had expanded beyond code and investors and quarterly projections. It happened gradually, a hand that lingered too long during a meeting, a glance across a crowded room that said more than words could, late nights at the office that turned into late dinners that turned into conversations that had nothing to do with business. Neither of them rushed it. They'd both been burned before, Reed by partners who'd betrayed him, Layla by a husband who'd never seen her at all. They approached each other carefully, like two people who'd learned the hard way that trust is earned, not given. Their first official date was unremarkable on purpose. A small Italian restaurant, a corner booth, no photographers, no headlines, just two people who'd found something unexpected in the wreckage of their past lives. "I never wanted the spotlight," Layla said, twirling pasta around her fork. "That was always his thing." Reed smiled. "I know. That's one of the things I like about you." She raised an eyebrow. "One of them?" He didn't answer. He just reached across the table and squeezed her hand 3 times. She froze.
He noticed. "What?" She shook her head, blinking away something she refused to call tears. "Nothing. Just someone used to do that. It meant something." "We can find a different signal," he said quietly. "Something that's just ours." She thought about it. Then she squeezed back. 4 times. He tilted his head. "Improved version," she said. "Better architecture." He laughed. She laughed too, the first real laugh in a very long time. An interviewer asked her about it once, about the journey, about the divorce, about building something new from the ashes of something old. Layla considered the question for a long moment. "Sometimes the best thing someone can do for you is underestimate you," she said finally. "It gives you room to grow." The interviewer pressed further. "Any advice for women in similar situations?" Layla smiled, the kind of smile that reached her eyes. "Document everything, learn everything, and never, ever let someone else hold the keys to what you've built." On a quiet Sunday evening in October, Layla stood on the balcony of her new apartment, a proper one this time, with actual rooms and a view of the hills, and watched the sun set over Austin. Reed was inside, attempting to cook something that smelled promising but looked concerning. She could hear him arguing with a recipe on his phone. Her own phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "I'm sorry for everything." She looked at it for a long time, then she deleted it, blocked the number, and went back inside to help Reed salvage dinner. Some chapters don't need responses. They just need endings. She didn't just survive, she built something better. Someone better found her. And Garrett learned that empires built on someone else's work have a way of crumbling. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories. See you next time.